Hello, and welcome back to the Glossy Week in Review podcast. I'm your host, senior fashion reporter Danny Parisi, and I'm here with Glossy's editor-in-chief, Jill Manoff. Hello, Jill.
Hi, so happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here, too. We were recording this episode live from the Glossy e-commerce summit. Yes, we just wrapped our final session. We had 3 amazing days of some great speakers, some great conversations with our attendees, and now we're just going to record a quick recap of some interesting thoughts and points and quotes and things we heard. And yeah, the people in the audience have heard all of this stuff, but that's okay. It'll be a good sort of summary of the week. So Jill, you and I both prepared a couple points each of different topics that we talked about. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start with one of them?
Sure, yeah. So we picked up on, like Danny said, top points over the speaker sessions and also the town hall discussions, which were so informative to learn what's weighing on your minds. But one thing that I picked up on was that traditional silos are still breaking down, so both in-house and in stores. We've been talking about this for a couple of years now, but especially in-house as people are working to ensure those like omni-channel success. No longer can you have an online department versus an in-store retail department. So Jen Volk from H&M talked about this. She's head of digital, and she talked about how she works with every area of the company. There's no area she doesn't touch. And at the same time, Elizabeth Price from Anthropologie talked about basically that they're doing this internally, but also working across Urban's teams, their various brands, they have great benefit to having all of these resources. So using these benefits to their advantage and tapping in where they can across brands. And then in terms of merchandising in those silos, we talked a little bit about it in the briefing that we do online, but I also noticed that this is something that Anthropologie has always done. They're not necessarily merchandising by category, and this is our dress section, and this is our shoes section, kind of mixing at a time when the curation is everything. You can get everything everywhere. So what makes our store unique? We've got this curation. We're inspiring. We offer opportunity for discovery. We heard that time and time again. So kind of revamping the merchandising mix, and some of those in our town halls talked about that they're picking up on ideas from Pinterest and TikTok. We referenced Coastal Grandma, but some of those trends, they're leveraging them in-house and in-store and online, in-store and online, to inform their merchandising and build out little scenes and opportunities to shop those trends. So I thought that was really interesting. It's definitely a new way to think about it. And yeah, silos are gone.
And specifically on Anthropologie, I think they're interesting because they have different brands within Urban, URBN. They do home and fashion and all that stuff, and then they also have Nuuly, which is rental, so a totally different business model, and it's all under the same company, and they kind of make them all work synergistically. One of the things I was going to mention was this is more a single topic, but resale and retail working together. I had a great conversation with Ben Heminger from Fashion File, and this is a little bit of like a pet issue for me. I have written a lot about resale, and those two are becoming, I think, a lot more symbiotic, and they have been over the last couple of years. But he talked a lot about the customer is buying secondhand, and they're buying new, and they're renting. Like, they're doing all of it. They're mixing it all up, and I think maybe on the brand side or the company side, there's a little bit more like these are separate things, but the customer, I think, doesn't necessarily think of them as that separate. So I don't know if anyone here in the audience has been doing this, but I've seen a ton of brands opening their own secondhand or pre-owned sections on their websites. And Ben Heminger talked a lot about how that's like a rising tide. There's a symbiotic kind of thing between those two categories where it changes. Knowing that you can resell something, knowing that you could get it secondhand changes how people think about what they buy new. They might spend more, honestly, to buy something new, knowing that in a year or two they could maybe resell it. So I always find it really interesting, that discussion of how those two sides of fashion, I guess maybe that's more specific to fashion than beauty. I don't know if anyone's getting pre-owned like makeup removers or anything, but it's interesting how those two categories have slowly started to merge. So
Agree, and I often reference, because I've heard her say it twice, I'm a podcast listener, and Anna Wintour was talking about how when she goes to a high fashion brand store, and she's like, why don't you have resale in store? Like, I think that would be great. That is how Gen Z is shopping. Maybe it's more affordable. Also, it's an opportunity, if it's not maybe more affordable, to show the quality of your items and the resale value that it holds up. It says a lot about the state of your brand. And yeah, it's interesting.
Cool. What other topics did you note?
Both brands and consumers are pinching pennies. Like, this is this day and age. But in terms of brands, we heard a lot about rising ad and acquisition costs. Obviously, they're squeezing brands, and also brands are getting squeezed by retail partnerships. We were hearing from some about how those margins are no longer working, and about the opportunity to renegotiate. And then even some downsizing. Some folks have told me in some side conversations about what's happening in-house and taking on more responsibility as companies streamline. And on the other notion, on the consumer side of things, we heard a brand that's popping a Buy with Prime button on their product pages, and that's how not only saving on customers saving on shipping and getting their speed and all the things that they're used to. That's happening, but we also heard brands are already thinking about holiday. Some said that they started thinking about holiday in January, just expecting this to be a super competitive year. And as consumers are pinching their pennies, they're going to start shopping earlier, as soon as September, if not before. So brands are getting a jump start on their plans, which was interesting to me. And then also, obviously, the rise of TikTok Shop. And that really took off for a lot of people, because a lot of influencers were stressing the price savings. Like, you can get this cheaper here. And everybody's like, well, then I'm gonna. And TikTok, of course, was subsidizing some of those costs, and why influencers were able to do that. But TikTok Shop did offer cost savings. And again, consumers were looking for that at that time.
Yeah. I also heard on the topic of pinching pennies, I know a couple people here told me about maybe trying to move away from Meta or finding other ways to advertise that is not so expensive and maybe having some reduced effectiveness. Yes. On the topic of brands being squeezed by retailers and kind of the negotiation between those two, that was one of my favorite topics that we talked about, was just how, especially if you're a smaller brand, how you can work with a big retailer and not, either have your brand sort of led in a direction you don't want to go, or be forced to do things you maybe don't want to do. I was just having a great conversation with Katie McKee. I don't think she's here anymore, but she was saying, if you're a brand, the retailer can be your partner, but they're not your friend necessarily. It's like you're kind of aligned in one way. You both want to sell the product, whatever it is, but you're kind of opposed, because they want a bigger margin and you want a bigger margin. So you're sort of like frenemies a little bit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that sometimes you have to kind of, it is a partnership, and so brands should be aware that everything's kind of negotiable if you have the leverage. Ricardo from Lerude had a very strong opinion on this. He told us that he asks all retailers to prepay them for their orders, which I think most retailers will probably not want to do that, but that's like a hard line for him. He was like, if they don't do that, then we don't sell to them, and then they're not going to carry Lerude. And I was like, that's really cool. I don't think that works for a ton of brands who are not Lerude. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that, if you're a brand, you have some leverage. You have a product, and if you're in a negotiation with a retailer, they probably want it. Unless you're a really big brand, they probably can't move that much. But it is a partnership. It is negotiable. And sometimes you can also walk away if you don't have to sell in a retailer if you don't want to. I know it can be really great to get your stuff in Nordstrom or Saks or something like that, or Sephora. But yeah, if you have to give up a lot of control, if you have to make a lot of sacrifices to make it work, what I was hearing from some brands at the summit was that maybe it's not always worth it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. There are pros and cons for every channel, and it is purely optional to sell at a retailer. And if it doesn't work to your benefit, and you don't see tons of pros involved, maybe opt out. And I don't know, I think the landscape has changed, and there's really not a you tell me otherwise, a Barney's that's like a brand launch pad, and you're there and you made it, and that, woo, like, wipe your hands. So, yeah, it's interesting. I optional. That's a powerful move.
It is a powerful move, and I was like, well, good on you that you can do that, but I don't think every brand can. The other thing is, I was talking to somebody backstage who was saying that when they started, and their brand was like 2 people, they got in contact with a big retailer, and the retailer was like, we want to put you in like 500 doors and sell, thousands of products, and they were like, we have 2 SKUs. Like, I don't even know, like, we don't have the resources to even produce that much stuff. And instead of walking away, they flew to wherever this retailer's based, keeping it vague, and was just kind of said that to them, like, we'd love to sell it to you, but like, we can't swing that. And then the retailer ended up helping them. I think they reduced kind of the amount, the size of the order, and the retailer helped them sort of with sampling and some other stuff. So you can make it work. Like, you could walk away if it's truly like not going to work, but there's ways. I think retailers can be flexible sometimes. So
yeah.
Okay, what else?
Keeping up with the content demand. That was a hot topic. I think it's probably the biggest challenge outside of acquisition costs that I heard. Osh from Mesa talked about not only like turning to Gen AI to produce some of these fragrance campaigns, but also they have the benefit of having an in-house content studio. That came up a lot. Ricardo Larude, also vertical marketing, he was talking about the benefits of that and the speed that it affords, both just bringing things to market, and also Tucker Nuck, hey, heard that they also have an in-house content studio, and that they're churning out more content than the executives of former employers, which were big retailers like the Bloomingdale's of the world. So that was interesting to hear. And also brands talking more about leveraging UGC and influencers as that demand continues to go up, it seems.
Yeah. I also had some thoughts about marketing as we talked about it. One thing is just the ability or inability to kind of predict what's going to work. I mean, one thing I've heard, this was not at the summit, but I've heard from brands in the past that, especially with TikTok, you kind of just make a lot of content, and then just, if you make enough, 1 or 2 or something will kind of take off and go viral. I really liked what Ayla Morin from Merit said about how marketing, she said, marketing is 80% safe bets and 20% jumping on something random, like when it happens. But that 20%, the jumping is valuable, because she says if you're not doing that, you're not learning.
Yeah, Sarah too just said that about TikTok. Like, we just got on there early. We didn't think about it, and definitely recommended that. Like, what's the harm?
Yeah, and I also think that goes across channels too. I've heard, again, this was before the summit, but I heard from a brand about Pinterest kind of taking off organically without putting much money into it, and then they invested in Pinterest after it was already, they were noticing that their customer was there already. I think Sarah said something about that too. See where your customer is and then just go there.
Yeah.
Because they can kind of lead you. I also heard from some people here at the summit that they've kind of had a similar experience with some other channels taking off unexpectedly. Connected TV, a lot of people mentioned to me that Connected TV has been a great channel. I forget who said this, a brand in our town hall, someone was talking about, their customer is it's a higher price point and a little more upscale. So they didn't think this customer would be even watching ads. Like, you'd think they'd pay for the higher tier Netflix subscription where you don't have to watch ads, but somehow that customer is seeing that ad. So it's working for them. I think Sarah Lee from Glow Recipe said something similar about SMS taking off, although that wasn't organic. They put stuff into it, obviously.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of channels out there. Out of home as well, Sarah mentioned, was helpful for their Do You campaign. So yeah, I think within a channel like TikTok, you put a lot of stuff out there and see what works. But across channels too, you can try something. You can see what's picking up automatically and go there, or you can experiment with SMS and see how your customer reacts to it.
Options beyond Meta. It's good. And meeting the customer where they are. That was also kind of a topic, but that's what it's about.
Cool. Anything else that you saw that you want to talk about?
No, I think that recaps it lovely.
Yeah, this was a great 3 days. Thank you guys all for being here.
Awesome.
Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to this. That helps us out so much. And don't forget to subscribe to the Glossy podcast, because you'll hear interviews with industry insiders every Wednesday and week interview episodes with me and Jill every Friday. Until next time, thank you for listening.